Welcome to Bike Garage. My name is Jeff Millinson. I'm going to be teaching you how to do basic bike repair and maintenance, mountain or road bike. All the stuff on the video is very up to date and easy to follow. The DVD is very interactive, so you can watch and teach yourself what you want. And even if you're not mechanically inclined, if you're patient and confident, you'll do okay. Who knows, you might start to enjoy bike mechanics. To get started, of course, you're going to need some tools. Now, for under $100, you can get yourself pretty set up with a toolkit with almost everything you need. If you're not into getting too dirty, you can pick up some nitrile gloves, keep your hands clean. Next thing we're going to need is some lubricants and cleaners. Recommend to get some dry lube for your chain, maybe pick up some light oil for your components. You're going to need some grease and some solvent or cleaner. WD-40 does work as a solvent. You can also pick up some stuff at the automotive store for pretty cheap and mix it up. And some medium strength Loctite would be a good thing to have. Small parts washers such as this make it a lot easier to clean parts with. You can pick them up fairly cheap. I got this one at a garage sale for about 40 bucks. You can save your old toothbrushes and use them in the solvent tank. You don't absolutely have to have a bike stand like this, but it'll definitely make things easier. A wheel truing stand is another good tool to have. You can also true your wheels in your bike, just turn your bike upside down. Once you've got your shop all set up, now it's time to get wrenching. A clean and well-maintained bike will run smoother and last a lot longer, and a poorly adjusted bike can be pretty dangerous. Modern bikes today seem like they're more sophisticated, and technology is a little more sophisticated, but all the logical principles have always been the same, road or mountain bikes. When purchasing a new bike or new parts, be sure to hang on to the manuals. They hold important information such as the torque specs and compatibility specs. It's a good idea to periodically check your bike over, especially before any big rides. First thing I would look at is the tires and tubes. You want to make sure that the tires aren't worn out. A worn tire will start to build a kind of a ridge on the side, causing it to be unsafe. So the tire should have somewhat of a round profile to it. You should run the recommended air pressure range that's written on the side of the tire. Make sure to check the valve stem, make sure it's not damaged, and please replace any tires that are damaged. A bike has 4 major bearing surfaces. 2 of them are located in the center of the wheel, known as the hub. And to check your hub bearings, you're going to grab part of the frame, and grab the wheel, and rock it back and forth, and you shouldn't feel any play at all. The next major bearing surface is in between your crank arms, and you can't actually see these bearings, but they definitely over time wear out. You're going to grab the crank arm and a part of the frame and rock the crank back and forth just like you did the wheel. You shouldn't feel any play. Sometimes I'll check it in a couple different spots. Next, you're going to check the headset. Headset is what the steering rides on. There's a bearing on the top and a bearing on the bottom. Over time it can become loose. You can smack the wheel real hard. Sometimes you can feel a little play. Go ahead and give the brakes a good squeeze. You're checking the tightness of the cable and making sure the lever doesn't hit the grip. Go ahead and inspect the brake pads. Look for any worn out pads, replace them if necessary. Next, go ahead and spin through the gears. Check to see that everything shifts. Make sure that the chain doesn't fall off. Check all the cable and housing. Look for any cracked housing or any cables that are starting to fray. Check the drivetrain. Should be fairly clean. The chain should be well lubricated. Check all the quick release levers on your wheels or axle nuts. Make sure they're tight. The last thing I'd check is all the nuts and bolts. Make sure everything is properly tightened. To wash your bike, you're going to need a brush to clean your gears, a sponge to clean the frame. You can pick up some degreaser at the bike shop or the local automotive store, and a bucket to mix up some soapy water. First, take the degreaser and coat the drivetrain real well. Make sure to get all of the chain, get the derailleurs, get the crank set real well, and take your brush and you're just going to want to scrub the gears real well. Also get the chain real good. Scrub the derailleurs. Anywhere where you really see some grease and grime. Now take some soapy water and wipe the frame down. And rinse. And anytime you wash your bike, you should really go back and lube everything. Nail polish works pretty good for touch-up paint, especially if you've got a really awkward color. You can take a little bit of Pledge or furniture polish and shine her up. There's all kinds of different pedals out there. Fortunately, they all install and remove the same way. You're going to need a pedal wrench, and there are a few models out there, however, that you're going to just use an Allen wrench. I'm going to first remove the right pedal. The right pedal is a regular thread. You're going to turn it to the left to loosen. Now I'm going to remove the left or non-drive side pedal. However, keep in mind that it is actually a reverse thread. Now before you go and install the pedals, you want to make sure you want to grease the pedal threads real well. The drive side pedal installs to the right, and if you're not sure which pedal is which, they are actually marked right and left. Install the non-drive side or the left pedal. Remember, you're going to go turn it to the left to install. Once you've got both pedals installed, go ahead and make sure that they're both tight. To install your cleats on your clipless pedal shoes, you're first going to find the widest part of the shoe, and that's going to be the dead center of the cleat. Go ahead and lay your cleat on there. You can use a medium strength Loctite on the bolts to keep them from coming loose. Tighten them down just a little bit, just so now that we can move the cleat around. And you want it centered left to right, and then again you want it basically in the widest part of the shoe. Once you've found the good spot, tighten it down. And after a couple good rides, you might want to go back and check these bolts again. Once you've got your cleat mounted, go ahead and check it. Make sure that it clips in. Alright, there are some shoes out there that the tread right next to the cleat will interfere with you clipping in. You can take a razor blade and just cut away a little bit of the rubber. You can also use a Dremel with a grinding bit on it. Most pedals have a spring tension adjustment on the side, and this basically adjusts how easy or hard it is to get in and out. When you go to replace your seat post, you got to make sure that you've got the exact size. They come in all kinds of different diameters. Most seat posts have them printed on the seat post itself. If you're replacing a post that you don't have one, just take some calipers and you just want the inside diameter of the seat tube and take that down to your bike shop and they'll match you up with a post. To remove the seat off the post, you're going to just need an Allen wrench. You're just going to go ahead and loosen the clamp bolt of the seat. Go ahead and slide the seat off the rails. Now take your new seat, slide it in between the clamp of the seat post. If you're not sure which direction the post goes, you always want the bolt in the back. And when you tighten this down, you're actually just going to leave it somewhat snug. You're going to make your final seat post adjustment on the actual bike itself. Before inserting your seat post into the bike, be sure to grease the seat tube real well. Now if you are running a carbon fiber seat post, you don't want to use any grease at all. If it's a titanium seat post, you want to make sure to use a product called Tie Prep. This will keep it from seizing in the seat tube. Now if the frame materials are the same as I described, you do the same thing. Titanium frame, use Ti-Prep. Carbon frame, run it dry. Install the seat and post. Once installed, we're going to go ahead and adjust the seat. We've got two adjustments on this seat. We've got the angle of the saddle, and then we also have front and back. Now generally you want about the center of the seat to be center of the post, and as far as the angle goes, from the front and the back of the seat you want it about parallel to the ground. Now that's just a starting point, it is preference. That's usually one of the more comfortable positions of a seat. Tighten it down. Alright, now we're going to adjust the seat height. Now this is very important because you don't want to hurt your knees. You're going to go ahead and sit on the bike, and the idea is when you have one foot all the way at the very bottom, you want your knee just slightly bent. If you're doing some real technical, maybe downhill riding, it wouldn't be a bad idea to lower the seat a little bit just for safety wise. If you're having a problem with your seat post slipping, what you want to do is take it out and clean the seat tube really good, as well as the seat post, and go ahead and apply some fresh grease, or if it's titanium, some anti-seize, and that should help with the slipping. If you're fixing a flat, or if you're just installing new tires, you're going to need a set of tire levers, preferably plastic so it doesn't hurt the rim. An air source such as a floor pump, hand pump works well, and a CO2 gun works good. A spare tube just in case. A patch kit. If it's a tubeless tire and wheel, you can get a tubeless tire patch, and I'd recommend using some sealant. And rim strips, just in case your rim strips are dry rotted and cracked. First thing we're going to do is we're going to take our tire lever and we're going to insert it underneath the tire bead, just a little bit past the valve. And you're going to go ahead and pry the tire bead off the rim, and if it's real tight you can clip the tire lever to the spoke. You can take another tire lever right next to it and pry the bead over, and now you should be able to slide the tire lever around, pulling the bead off. Once you've got half the tire off, go ahead and pull the tube out. Now you can take the rest of the tire off. Now we're ready to inspect the rim. First thing you're going to look at is make sure that the ends of the spokes are all covered. There's a part called a rim strip, covers all the ends. If I pull this off, you can see what it looks like underneath. Make sure none of these holes are exposed. To repair a tube, you're going to first have to find what caused it. Air it up about 2 to 3 times its original size. If it's a big hole, it'll be pretty obvious. The air will come out pretty fast. If you're not finding anything, you can submerge the tube in some soapy water and look for some bubbles to come out. It might help to take a marker and mark where the hole is. Now you're ready to patch it. And go ahead and take some sandpaper, and we're going to scuff the area real well. Make it rough so the patch sticks real well. Make sure it's clean. We're going to take the glue, and we're going to go ahead and apply just a thin layer, a little bit larger than the size of the patch. You're going to want to wait for that to completely dry, have like a dull look before you apply the patch. We'll let that sit. Now we're going to check the tire. Go ahead and run your hand along the inside. At the same time, look at the outside and make sure there's nothing poking in the tire. If there's any big tears or cuts in the side of the tire, I'd recommend replacing the tire. If you see a thorn, you can take some small needle nose pliers and try to pull it out. If that doesn't work, any sharp object such as a knife, you can take a spoke and flatten it down to pull thorns out. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and put that patch on. Looks like it's nice and dry. I'm going to peel a patch, stick it on the tube, rub it real well, and that's it. We're ready to go. Another way to repair a tube, and also a great preventive, is tire sealant. You can inject this into Schrader style valve tubes. What you do is you're going to take a valve core tool, you're going to insert it into the valve, you're going to go ahead and unscrew the valve, and it'll come out. You're going to take the tire sealant and go ahead and pour it into the tube. There's two types of valves found on bicycles. You've got your standard Schrader valve, just like a car. You just place the chuck on top and it'll inflate the tire. And then you've got a Presta valve. It's a real skinny valve. To use it, you unscrew the top part just till it stops. Sometimes I tap it down because it sticks, and then you can go ahead and inflate it. Now, there are some rims that have a real deep dish to them where this Presta valve won't reach. They do sell long stem valves, and if you don't have access to a long stem valve, they make valve extensions that just thread on the top of the Presta valve. One last thing that you can do with a Presta valve is they sell small adapters that allow you to convert it to a Schrader valve. You just thread it on and air it up. Okay, once you've got the tube ready, you're going to take the tire and install one side of it on the rim. I'm going to take the tube, we're going to insert the valve first and go ahead and put the tube in the tire. Now we're going to start at the valve and we're going to pull the tire bead over the rim, and you're going to work all the way around. Should end up at the opposite side of the valve stem. Once you get to the end, some tires are slightly tighter than others. You might need to take your tire lever and you're going to insert it the other direction you would to take it off, and in just real small little steps pry it over. Careful not to pinch the tube. It always does help to have a little bit of air in the tube when you install it. And now you're ready to air it up. I've seen Schrader valves leak right around where you air it up. Sometimes sealant can clog the valve. You can get replacement valve cores for it. You just take out the old one. There's the valve core. I'm good. Just insert a new one. Out in the middle of nowhere and you cut the side of your tire, you can always take a dollar bill and fold it in half, and business card would work, and you're just going to place it behind the cut in between the tube and the tire, and that should be enough to get you home. If you're not a big fan of Presta valves, you can always drill your hole out to a Schrader, but make sure that your rim isn't so deep that a Schrader valve won't go all the way through. What you're going to need is a drill and a drill bit, preferably 11/32. 2164 bit will work as well. Aluminum is fairly soft. It's pretty easy to drill through. Just make sure that you drill it nice and centered. And the next thing I'd recommend is tap all the metal burrs out. After you drill it, you'll notice you'll have a little bit of an edge. You can take a sharp razor blade and try to clean it up. Before putting the new tube back in, it might help to put a little baby powder into the tire. This will keep the tube from sticking. And if you have some issues with the valve stem ripping, this will help. And that's usually caused by riding with too low of air pressure. To replace a tubeless tire and wheel, you're going to need some soapy water, recommend some tire sealant, a tubeless patch kit, a spare tube, and to inflate it you're going to need either a CO2 cartridge or an air compressor. A tubeless tire, it's recommended that you don't use any tire levers at all. The sidewall of the tire acts like an O-ring, so if you use a tire lever you could possibly damage it. First thing you're going to do is you're going to push the bead to the middle of the rim all the way around on the tire. This should loosen the tire up. The center of the rim is slightly lower than the rest of the wheel. Now you should be able to use your hands. Go ahead and pull the one side of the tire off. To repair a tubeless tire, it's easiest just to throw a tube in it. There's a couple other things that you can do. You can air the tire up and submerge the tire in some soapy water and find the leak and pull the tire back off. And they sell tubeless tire patch kits very similar to patching a regular tube. And I would also recommend to fill the tire with a tire sealant, and this will help prevent flats as well as repair flats. Unscrew the valve lock ring, and there'll be an O-ring underneath it. Go ahead and inspect it real well for any cracks. Make sure it's all intact. Now to install the tire, place half the tire on the middle of the wheel. Before installing the rest of the tire, go ahead and take your sealant and pour it into the tire. Now install the other side of the tire. Alright, now before I'm going to air the tire up, I'm going to take some soapy water and I'm just going to spray it around the bead. This will help the tire seat. Spray both sides. Now to inflate it, it's going to require either a CO2 gun or an air compressor. Alright, before you air it up, I'm going to press down a little bit to kind of create a tight fit by the valve. And a tubeless tire, you shouldn't inflate above 65 pounds. Usually run them between about 35 and 60. It's pretty common that your hub bearings will loosen up in your wheel. To check this, you want to grab your wheel and grab part of the frame and go ahead and rock the wheel back and forth. You shouldn't feel any play. If you do feel a little bit of play, you want to make sure to get that adjusted right away. You don't want to ride too long on a loose hub. Go ahead and take the wheel out. Okay, to adjust your hub, you're going to need a set of cone wrenches and a set of regular wrenches. Your front hub has two nuts on each side. The very inside nut is known as the cone. That's what rides on the bearing. You've got the outside nut. This is the lock nut. And this is backed against the cone nut to keep it from coming out of adjustment. Now this hub is a little loose. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my cone wrench, insert it inside, and take your regular wrench, and we're going to loosen the actual nut, turn it to the left. And now this hub was loose, so I'm going to tighten the cone just a little bit. Go ahead and just snug this up to it. Check it. And it still feels like there's a little bit of play. I'm going to go ahead and tighten this just a little more. Now if it's a little too tight, you can insert a cone wrench on the other side like this and get another cone wrench, and you can just kind of fine tune it. This takes a little bit of practice. The idea with a bearing is you want it to be as loose as you can without any play. Now the thing with a wheel is the quick release has so much leverage that it's actually going to tighten your hub just a little bit. So most hubs I actually going to leave just a little bit of play, but once you get it in the frame and tightened up, you're not going to notice it. I'm ready for the final torque. Everybody in their lifetime has hit a rock or a pothole before, I'm sure, and the after effect is much worse. You can damage your wheel, possibly even break a few spokes. I'm going to show you how to do a little bit of minor wheel truing. It's definitely something that takes practice and a little bit of patience. Before you make that wheel true, you want to make sure that your hub is properly adjusted. If you have a loose hub, you're going to get an inaccurate wheel true. There's two sides to the wheel. One side here, the spokes are actually drilled off center. They're pulling the wheel this direction. You've got this side. Again, the spokes are off center and they're pulling the wheel in this direction. It takes a little practice to get the right spoke tension. They do make a tool that goes onto the spoke to see how tight you get it. The best thing I can tell you is just to feel neighboring spokes. You can also do a sound check by plucking the spoke, and you can see the difference in the sound. A tighter spoke will have a higher pitched noise and a looser spoke will have a lower pitched noise. I turn the nipple clockwise. This is going to loosen the spoke, causing the wheel to go this way. When I tighten the spoke or turn it counterclockwise, it's going to bring the rim this way. This wheel, you can notice, has a couple wobbles in it. The first wobble, right about right here, what we're going to do is I'm going to tighten these spokes on the opposite side, and this should pull the rim in this direction. You usually tighten spokes instead of loosen. However, if you come across a real tight spoke, loosen the opposite side. I've got a little spot here. And go ahead and tighten just a little bit at a time. Bring the wheel over. See, it's getting a little better. And we're going about right here. What I'm going to do is, the spoke feels a little tight, so instead I'm going to actually loosen this side, and that should push the wheel in that direction. It's looking a lot better. I'll go in a little bit here and tighten the spoke. Any bike that has a rim brake, you want to inspect the rim real well. Believe it or not, the pads can wear the rim down to a point where it'll get really thin and possibly crack and fail. You also want to inspect right near the spoke holes for any cracks or fatiguing. If you get a sidewall impact, you can take an adjustable crescent wrench and bend it out. Just be very careful not to indent the rim. If you find that your spokes are constantly coming loose, take some medium strength Loctite and just drop a little bit down the nipple. On a hydraulic brake, I would periodically check the pads for wear, inspect all the hardware, make sure that nothing's cracked or broken, check the brake line real well, make sure that all the mounting bolts are tight, and go ahead and give the brake a good squeeze. Check for any fluid leaking from the master cylinder. One thing to remember on a hydraulic brake is when the wheel is removed, don't ever squeeze the brake lever. This will throw the pistons out too far and you'll have to go and get them taken apart and possibly rebled. Inspect the pads, make sure they're not past the wear line. If your pads have been in contact with any lubricants or brake fluid, they've become contaminated and should be replaced right away. For adjusting your brake, you want to check the hub, grab the wheel, rock it back and forth, make sure it's not loose. Go ahead and release the quick release or axle nut. Make sure the wheel is all the way in the dropout. Go ahead and tighten that down. Now, there's two styles of brakes. This style adjusts by loosening these top bolts, and now the brake is able to move side to side. And while these are loose, you're going to go ahead and squeeze the brake lever and hold it, and go ahead and tighten those mounting bolts back down, and that should center the brake. If your brake does not adjust at the top, you're going to have to loosen the side clamp bolts, and you're going to need to insert these tiny shims in between the brake and the brake mount, and the idea is you want the caliper centered above the rotor. If your brake is feeling somewhat spongy, it's possible that there's a little air in the system. I'd recommend to go down to your local bike shop and have it professionally bled. Some hydraulic brake levers do have a reach adjustment, so you can change where the position of the lever is. When installing your rotors, be sure to use Loctite on the bolts. I would periodically take some rubbing alcohol and clean the rotors real well. Mechanical disc brake is one of the more simple brake systems out there. It's basically just your normal brake cable and brake lever, except it's got a rotor mounted to the wheel and a caliper mounted to the frame. As far as maintenance goes, you want to try to keep your rotor as clean as you can. Try not to touch it. If it gets muddy and dirty, you want to clean it off. Rubbing alcohol works real well to clean your rotors. Every now and then you're going to want to check all the bolts to make sure they're tight. Check the rotor bolts and all the hardware and mounting bolts. Next thing you want to do is pull the wheel out, and we're going to inspect the brake pads real well. Make sure they're not worn. If they are, go ahead and pull them out and replace them. And when you put new pads in, you want to make sure you don't want to touch this. Your finger oils will contaminate the pads. Before you adjust your disc brake, check and make sure that your hub is properly adjusted. Make sure that the wheel is all the way in the dropouts of the frame. First thing you're going to want to do is we're going to actually release the cable completely. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to loosen the mounting bolts. Once you've loosened these, the brake will be able to move in all directions. Now, these mechanical brakes, one side, the inside is fixed. The pad just stays there. This outside pad, when you squeeze the brake lever, is the pad that moves in towards the rotor. So to adjust this, what I'm going to do is, most brakes have an adjustment on both sides for the pads. I'm going to turn the fixed side pad in towards the rotor, let's say about 3 or 4 turns, or clicks. And the next thing you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and squeeze the brake with your finger so it's locked, and you're going to go ahead and tighten those mounting bolts down. This should make sure that the caliper is parallel to the rotor. And tighten them all the way down. Now you're going to let go of the brake. You're going to pull the cable just snug. Go ahead and tighten the clamp bolt down. Now that side that you tightened, go ahead and back it off a few turns. Go ahead and check the brake. Now you can fine-tune it by changing the pad distance on either side, and you can also tighten the cable up either at this end or at the brake lever end. Now you're ready to ride. Occasionally you'll get a little bit of rub. It's pretty common. These rotors do tend to kind of get a little wavy. So if you can always try to kind of tweak it back a little bit. There's a lot of brake levers have a screw. You can bring the lever in a little bit closer, so if you've got some smaller hands, it might be a little bit easier to reach. When installing your rotors, be sure to use Loctite on the bolts. Most road calipers have a release mechanism on the side to spread the brake open to allow you to get the wheel out. On a Campanola brake, the brake release is on the brake lever itself. Just depress the pin and the brake will be released. Once you've worn past these horizontal grooves on a brake pad, it's probably time to replace it. Before you replace your brake pads, it's important to know what kind of wheel you have. If it's a really high-end wheel made out of a ceramic material, it will require a ceramic pad. This is identified usually by a certain color. It's usually gray. Just see your local bike shop to find out the right pad for your brake. This style of brake pad, I can slide the pad out and slide a new one in. Other styles require you to loosen the Allen bolt on the back and completely remove the body of the pad. Before you do a brake adjustment, loosen the quick release or axle nut and make sure that the wheel is all the way in the dropouts. You're going to grab the wheel and part of the bike and rock it back and forth. Make sure that your hub is properly adjusted. If it's loose, you're going to get an inaccurate brake adjustment. Spin the wheel. Check to see that it's true, not wobbling back and forth. First, back the barrel adjuster all the way until it stops and back it out about 3 or 4 turns. You're going to squeeze the brake and loosen the clamp bolt on the side and pull the cable tight. Go ahead and tighten the cable clamp bolt back down. Now you're ready to adjust your pads. Now adjust the brake pad so the entire pad surface touches the rim. It should hit about the middle of the rim and it should be parallel to it. Do the same to the other side. After you've got your pads aligned, now we're going to get the cable tension. Go ahead and back the barrel adjuster in till there's about 1 to 2 millimeters of distance in between each pad. And your final adjustment is to center the brake. There's an adjustment on the top. You're going to need a Phillips head screwdriver or Allen wrench. Go ahead and screw it in or out, and this will move the brake to the left or the right. Just make sure that your brake pads hit the rim at the same time. You can take some fine steel wool and clean the rim. This will help with your stopping power. Over time, your pads will glaze over from heat. You can take a file and file it down. To help hold the steering still while you're adjusting the front brake, you can take a toe clip strap and just wrap it around the wheel and the frame. You can smooth your brake out by adding a little bit of light oil to all the pivots, as well as the spring. Careful not to get any oil on the pads or the rim. V-brakes are found on a lot of mountain bikes. They have excellent stopping power. You should periodically check the pad alignment and brake travel and possibly install new pads. To release a V-brake to enable you to take the wheel out, squeeze the brake together and you're going to pull the brake noodle out. Before you replace your brake pads, it's important to know what kind of wheel you have. If it's a really high-end wheel made out of a ceramic material, it will require a ceramic pad. This is identified usually by a certain color. It's usually gray. Just see your local bike shop to find out the right pad for your brake. Once you've worn past these horizontal grooves on a brake pad, it's probably time to replace it. Go ahead and inspect the pad. If the pad slides out, go ahead and do so, otherwise just replace the whole thing. Put the pad back on the arm. Squeeze the brakes against the rim and check to see that the brake arm is almost 90 degrees vertical. If not, you have to rearrange the spacers on the brakes. If you have a post style pad such as this, you can adjust the distance from the arm to the rim. Switch the spacers if necessary. Before you make your brake adjustment, I would recommend to loosen your quick release or axle nut and make sure that the wheel is all the way up in the dropouts of the bike. Go ahead and grab the wheel and the frame and rock the wheel back and forth. Make sure that there's no play in the hub and spin the wheel, and the wheel should be fairly true. Now you're ready to adjust your brake. Before you align your pads, it might be easier to release the brake springs on the side of the brake. This way you don't have the resistance of the spring. Now you're going to go ahead and line up the pad with the rim. You want the entire brake pad to touch the surface. You'll make sure the pad is parallel to the rim. And just before you tighten it down all the way, you want to make sure the back has about a 1 millimeter gap. So the front of the pad touches the rim before the back of the pad. This is called toeing in. This will keep the noise down. Now do the same to the opposite side. Before we finish the brake adjustment, I'm going to back the barrel adjuster inward on the brake lever all the way till it stops, and then I'm going to go ahead and back it out about 2 turns. And this will give me a little room for adjustment. Place the brake springs back. Go ahead and connect the cable back. We're going to loosen the cable clamp bolt, and we're going to tension the cable to where there's about 1 to 2 millimeters of gap in between each brake pad. Tighten the clamp bolt down. You're going to squeeze the lever and check the brake. Next, we're going to make sure that the brake is centered. There's a centering screws on each side of the brake. Some are done with a Phillips, some are done with an Allen key. By turning one screw, you're going to bring the brake over to one side. By loosening it, we'll go to the other side. We'll make sure that they hit the rim at the same time. You can now go back and fine-tune it with the barrel on the brake lever to make it tighter or looser. And another adjustment that you can make on some brake levers allow you to put a limit screw into where the lever starts. So if you have smaller hands, you can change the reach. Keep in mind this will change the cable tension, so you might have to go back and adjust it. Having a clean rim will help with braking power. You take some fine steel wool and go over the side of the rim. If it appears that your pads are somewhat glazed over from heat, you take a fine file and file it down. Make sure to keep the same contour of the brake pad. If you notice your brake sticking, you can remove it from the post and clean the post real well. Apply some grease. Before you place the brake back on, you'll notice that there's 3 holes drilled for the spring to go. Factory usually goes to the middle. You would go to the top hole to create more spring tension and the bottom hole for less. The front, however, does not have this adjustment on it. To help hold the steering still while you're adjusting the front brake, you can take a toe clip strap and just wrap it around the wheel and the frame. Chains usually last between 800 and about 1,500 miles. Really depends on what kind of riding you're doing. A good sign that you need a new chain is assuming your derailleur is adjusted properly. When you're climbing uphill, sometimes the chain will slip off the rear cogs. That's usually a good sign that the chain's worn. Be careful though, if you wait too long to put a chain on it, you're going to wear the rear cogs down to where you put a new chain on it and it won't mesh up right. So the best way to find out if the chain will mesh up with the cassette is just put a new chain on it and go test ride it and see if it skips. If it skips, you're going to need a new cassette. The front chain rings wear as well with the chain, not near as fast as the rear cassette, so be sure to check your chain rings for wear as well. 2 other ways that you can measure your chain is you can go down to your local bike shop and they've got an actual chain tool. You can either purchase or have them do it. They're just going to insert it on the chain and rotate the top, and this will give you how much the chain is stretched. Another way to do this is a simple technique with a ruler. 12 links should measure 12 inches. One link is basically an outer plate and an inner plate. That's considered one link. So go ahead and measure 12 of them. Center of the pin to the center of the pin. If you're about 1/8 of an inch over, it's time for a new chain. Okay. 2 ways to remove your chain. One method, if you have a SRAM chain, they usually have a master link where you can push both links together and the chain will pop apart. The other method, if you don't have that style, is to use a chain tool. And what we're going to do is just pick a link to insert it on. Go ahead and screw the chain tool in. And you don't want to pop the pin all the way out. You'll never get it back in. Go ahead and pull the chain out. When you purchase a brand new chain from the factory, it's usually coated in a grease to protect it from rusting. This stuff's pretty sticky. All the dirt and everything's going to stick to it. So I'd almost recommend to take a brand new chain and actually clean it with some solvent or some degreaser of some kind before you put it on. When you get your new chain, you're going to probably notice right away that it's much longer than your original one. They just come in one long length. You're supposed to shorten it. It might help to take your old chain and just line it up next to the new one to get the right length. Remember, a stretched chain is going to be slightly longer than a new chain. For installing the chain, first shift the derailleur all the way to the smallest cog. We're going to route the chain starting with it's going to go right on top of the lower pulley, and then it's going to go underneath the upper pulley and around, and then around the cassette. Now shift the front to the smallest ring, bring the chain through the front derailleur and around the small ring. The idea to have a proper chain length is when in this gear combination, small, small, the derailleur should just be slightly taut. You shouldn't have any rub down here on the cage. For example, if I were to break the chain about right there, you can notice that there's a gap here and it's not going to be rubbing. If I were to have it just a slightly one more link longer, you notice then you're going to get rub. So the idea is you want the chain as long as you can without getting this chain to rub on the cage. Go ahead and get your chain tool out. You're going to break this chain. Remember not to drive the pin all the way out. And if you're using a SRAM chain, we're going to put the chain together using those quick links. This chain is actually a Shimano chain. One thing you got to remember is on any Shimano chain you don't ever want to run the pin back through. You want to make sure that you get a replacement pin. We're going to go ahead and take the chain off the front crank. This will kind of ease the tension a little bit. And go ahead and place the chain together. You're going to insert the link through the pin. It's tapered on one end, so it'll kind of guide itself through. I'm going to go ahead and take the chain tool, drive the pin through. It's about twice as long as a normal pin. This way it rivets itself and we're going to snap the other end off. Go ahead and drive it all the way in. Now we're going to take our chain tool. Notice how there's all this excess pin on the back. And I'm actually going to snap it off with my chain tool. And once you drive a pin in, you'll notice that it's kind of got a little resistance to it, somewhat stiff. You can actually take the first section of the chain tool here, and this is going to stretch the chain out a little bit to kind of loosen it up. You can feel it kind of snap in. Place it back on the ring. Make sure we're not rubbing there, and that's how you do it. If it's not a Shimano chain, you can actually run the link back through without using a chain pin. You just make sure not to push the pin too far through. And again, you're going to get probably a stiff link from doing it. So you want to use the first part of the chain tool to get rid of the stiff link. When you fit a SRAM chain, be sure to break it on two of the inside links because the master link goes on the outside. We're just going to clip these together. Chains do break every once in a while. If you're out in the trail and you do have a chain break on you, what you do is you just take out the bad links, join the chain back together, and it wouldn't hurt to carry some spare links with you out on the trail. A lot of times while you're riding, you'll get a lot of chain slap on the chain stay. It's going to probably scratch up the paint and makes a lot of noise. If you would like, you can take an old tire and just cut a piece off, and you can just zip tie it to the chain stay, and this will keep the chain slap down. It's a little quick tool you can make. You take a spoke and bend it sort of like a C. You can actually clip it on the chain, and this will take some tension off some links, and now it's a little bit easier to do some work on the chain. A few different kinds of lubes out there. You've got dry lube, you've got wet lube. Dry lube is for riding in anywhere from mountains to city to street, as long as you're not riding in any wet weather conditions. This stuff will wash off. You want to lube it about every, I'd say, 4 or 5 rides, or when a chain starts making noise. Wet lube is good for more extreme riding, wet weather riding. It sticks to the chain better. Usually, I'd say 8 to 10 rides you want to apply some more wet lube. Or if you wash your bike at any time, you should always re-lube your components. First you want to do is you're going to put about a drop on every link. Once you've got the lube on, go ahead and let it sit for a few minutes, and then we're going to come back and actually take a rag, and you're just going to wipe the lube off. Remember, you want the lube in your chain, not on the chain. This way dirt's not going to stick to it. It's going to keep it pretty clean. Your rear gears are known as your cassette. Each individual gear is called a cog. Usually get about a couple thousand miles on one of these cassettes. It's about 2 or 3 chains life worth. If you wait too long to put your chain on, of course you're going to wear the rear cassette out to where you'll put it on and it's not going to work well with your chain. A sign of a worn cassette, if you've already put a new chain on it and it's still slipping in the back, it's possible you need a new cassette. The actual teeth on the cogs will start to get kind of a hook shape to them, and they'll start getting real pointy and sharp. So that might be a time for a replacement cassette. First, remove the wheel. To remove your cassette, you're going to need an adjustable wrench, a cassette lock ring tool, and a chain whip. First thing you're going to do is remove the quick release of the wheel. I'm going to go ahead and place this chain whip on the cassette. This is going to help you hold it. Insert the lock ring tool. You're going to go ahead and loosen it with the adjustable wrench. And the cassette should pull right off. Installing a new cassette is fairly simple. You want to make sure that you're replacing it with the same type of cassette. For example, you don't want to use a Campy cassette with a Shimano drivetrain. First thing you're going to do is you're going to find one of these grooves on the freewheel body is actually smaller than the rest of them. You're going to line that up with the cassette. Go ahead and install it. And the other rings, you don't have to worry about putting them on wrong. They only go on one way. And insert the lock ring. And go ahead and tighten it down. You don't need the chain whip to do this. And it's ready to be installed back on the bike. Now go outside for a little test spin, and if you're getting some skipping coming from the back end here, you might need to replace your chain. It's a good idea to know how to pull your crank off in case you ever need to do any bottom bracket work or possibly replace some chain rings. You're going to need an Allen wrench and a crank puller. First thing you want to do is you're going to remove the crank bolt. Just take it completely out. Next, we're going to insert the crank puller tool. Go ahead and carefully thread that in there. It wouldn't hurt to apply some grease on these threads of the crank puller, make it a little smoother. Make sure it's all the way in the crank. Go ahead and turn this around to the right and it will pull the crank right off. You're going to go ahead and do the same thing to the non-drive side. Alright, to install the crank, you just place the crank arm on the spindle. Before you install the crank bolt, you're going to apply some grease to it. And of course, if it's titanium, you want to use an anti-seize. You're going to get your Allen wrench. Go ahead and tighten it down. And go ahead and do the same thing to the non-drive side. This is a bottom bracket. You can't actually see it when it's installed in the bike. It mounts in between both crank arms, and there's a bearing on each side. If you're riding and you're hearing a little bit of creaking, popping noise, maybe it's time to remove the crank and pull the bottom bracket out, clean it, grease it, and put it back in. If there feels to be a little bit of play, it's possible that the bearings are worn, and it's actually a cartridge. You can't just adjust it. You take it out, throw it away, and put a new one in. To check for play, the first thing you actually want to do is check your crank bolts to make sure they're tight. And next, grab the crank arm, not the pedal, and the frame, and go ahead and side to side rock the crank back and forth. You shouldn't feel any play at all. If there is a little bit of play, it might be time to go ahead and replace that bottom bracket. There's several different tools for this job. The best thing I could say is to go down to your local bike shop and ask them exactly what bottom bracket tool you'll need. You're also going to need an adjustable wrench or possibly a ratchet. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen the non-drive side bottom bracket cup just to kind of get some tension off the drive side. Now the left side is a regular thread. You're going to turn it to the left. Now I'm going to come over to the drive side, and this is reverse thread. I'm going to turn it to the right to loosen. Go ahead and take it all the way out. Now completely remove the non-drive side cup. There's two different styles of bottom bracket. You've got your square tapered spindle and you've got a spline spindle. Of course, it has to match the crank arms. So when you replace your bottom bracket, it's probably easiest just to take it down to your local shop and have them match it up and measure it so you get the right one. If you've got a brand new frame and you're not sure what bottom bracket you need, the two measurements you're going to want is the spindle length and the width of the bottom bracket shell. The width of the bottom bracket shell will either be a 68 or a 73, and some bottom brackets today can adjust either size. The next thing you need is a spindle length, which depends on what crankset you use. We're going to install the bottom bracket. Before you do, there's a little bit of prep work to be done. You want to make sure that the threads inside the bottom bracket shell are very clean, as well as the threads on the bottom bracket are clean. You want to make sure you want to grease the threads really, really well. And if you're using a titanium bottom bracket, be sure to use Ti-Prep instead of grease. The first thing I do is I'm going to insert the non-drive side or the left side cup, and I'm just going to install it just a couple turns. It installs to the right, and this will help guide the main bottom bracket in. Now install the drive side, and it's a reverse thread, so you're actually going to turn it to the left to install. Go ahead and tighten it all the way down. Now tighten the non-drive side down. And you're ready to install the cranks. This is a new type of bottom bracket and crank set. It's a two-piece design. The drive side is connected to the spindle, and then the non-drive side bolts on. You can tell a two-piece crank right away by the fact that the drive side doesn't have a crank bolt. It's just hollow. What you're going to do is remove the non-drive side crank arm. This particular crank here has a self-extracting bolt. When I loosen it, it just pulls itself off. A couple other styles will have a side clamp bolt. Loosen it. If you can't pull it off, maybe take a mallet and tap it off. Once you've got the crank arm off, now you should be able to remove the entire crank off. Go ahead and push it through. If it's stuck, you can take a mallet, give her a good tap. There you go. Pretty neat. Now to remove the bottom bracket, I'm going to actually start with the non-drive side cup. Go ahead and turn it to the left and loosen it a little bit. Now you're ready to remove the drive side. Remember, this is actually reverse thread. You're going to turn it to the right. Go ahead and remove the cup. You can actually start turning the non-drive side at the same time. Now before you install the bottom bracket, make sure that you've cleaned the threads real good and greased them. Go ahead and install the non-drive side cup just a few turns. Place the drive side in. Remember, drive side is reverse thread. It would be lefty tighty, righty loosey. And tighten the drive side all the way. Go ahead and torque it down. Now go ahead and torque the non-drive side. After you've installed the cups, put a light coat of grease on the spindle. Don't forget to put the chain on the frame. Last, install the non-drive side crank. To do a derailleur adjustment, you're going to need a Phillips head screwdriver and an Allen wrench. Your front derailleur moves the chain from one sprocket to another on the crank set with each click of the shifter. There are some road shifters that have what's called a trim click, where the derailleur will just move a little bit just to get chain rub out. To start your derailleur adjustment, first shift the back into the largest cog and shift the front to the smallest ring. Now pull the derailleur cage away from the frame just above the outer sprocket and make sure that it is parallel with it, and also check to see that there is a 1 to 3 millimeter gap between the highest point of the tooth and the bottom of the cage. If not, you can reposition it with the clamp on the side of the derailleur, and you can adjust the angle as well as the height. The front derailleur has two screws called limit screws, and these keep the derailleur from shifting too far. One's labeled low for your low gear, so the smaller sprocket, and the other one's labeled high gear for your bigger sprocket. Loosen the derailleur cable clamp bolt. Before you tighten your derailleur cable down, be sure to back the barrel adjusters all the way in and then back out about 1 to 2 turns, and this will leave you a little room for adjustment. And now you're going to locate the low limit screw, and you're going to screw it in or out until the inside of the cage to the chain has about a 2 millimeter distance. And now you've adjusted your derailleur starting point. Go ahead and pull the cable taut and tighten the clamp bolt down again. Now shift the rear to the smallest cog and shift the front to the largest sprocket and locate the limit screw labeled high, and you're going to adjust this in or out until there's about a 2 millimeter gap between the outside of the chain and the inside of the cage. Once you've dialed that in, go ahead and shift through the gears, and you can adjust the cable tension either on the shifter or at the clamp bolt. If it's having a hard time coming up, I would maybe increase the cable tension and also check the limit screw. If it's having a hard time going down, then I would check the cable tension and also check the limit screw. If your chains are falling off either on the inside or the outside, it's a good sign that your limit screws aren't adjusted right. When replacing your front derailleur, there's different styles, so make sure that you get the right one. This is a traditional derailleur where the clamp is above the cage. You've got a bottom bracket mount front derailleur, and you have a top swing derailleur where the mount is below the cage. And the next thing you need to know is if the cable pulls from the bottom or from the top. When tightening down your front derailleur, be sure not to clamp it too tight. You can crimp the frame. Most derailleurs today are indexed, which means every click of the shifter, the derailleur will move from one cog to the next. Occasionally you'll find that when you shift the gear, it might not make it to the next gear or possibly even skip a cog. This is a good sign that you might need a derailleur adjustment. Before you get ready to make that derailleur adjustment, of course inspect the cable housing and the cable. Grab the bottom of the derailleur cage and rock it back and forth. Make sure there isn't an excessive amount of play. Check the pulleys real well. There shouldn't be any missing teeth. They shouldn't be bald. The derailleur has an upper and a lower pulley. The upper pulley, known as a floating pulley, actually moves side to side, and then the bottom one has no play side to side at all. So when you replace them, make sure you get the upper and the lower pulley. To do a rear derailleur adjustment, you need a 4, 5, or 6 millimeter Allen key and a Phillips head screwdriver. First, place the chain on the middle sprocket up front and go ahead and downshift the rear to the smallest cog. This is the resting position for the derailleur. Now we're going to loosen the cable. Okay, every derailleur has 2 limit screws. One for the small cog, labeled the H for the high, and the other screw is for the biggest cog, marked with an L for low gear. This keeps the chain from falling off either the inside or the outside of the gear. We're going to first start with the high screw. We're going to go ahead and we're going to pedal the bike, and you're going to look down the jockey wheel and try to align it to the center of the cog. And you can do this also by just hearing it. It should sound pretty quiet and smooth. And before we tighten the cable, go ahead and back the barrel all the way in till it stops, and go ahead and back it out about 2 to 3 turns. Tighten the cable down and go ahead and shift the gear up. It should go up pretty smooth. If there's a slight hesitation to go up, possibly the cable's not tight enough, go ahead and screw the barrel out just about 1/4 of a turn and try it again. If it skips a gear, it's possible that the cable is slightly too tight. I'm going to go ahead and back it in about 1/4 of a turn. Now that we've got the cable tension about right and the lower or the high limit screw set, go ahead and go to the biggest cog, and now we're going to adjust the low limit screw. And again, you want it to be center of the cog, and when you pedal it, it should sound fairly quiet. Now with the barrel, you're able to just kind of fine tune it. And it seems to be working pretty good. Now the last adjustment you can make on some of these rear cassettes, they're getting to be about a 32, 34 tooth sprocket. Occasionally you get a little bit of rub on the pulley wheel on the cog. This screw here is the bracket screw, and what this will do is this will bring the derailleur up slightly to keep the rub down. There's a small percentage of people that have a rear derailleur known as rapid rise, and basically it's the same thing except the resting position is the biggest cog rather than the smallest cog. So everything I showed you how to adjust the derailleur is the same, except you start tuning it in the biggest cog. If you're not sure what kind of derailleur you have, you can always just loosen the cable, go ahead and pedal the bike, and the derailleur will automatically go to its resting position. After you're done adjusting the derailleur, it wouldn't hurt to come back through with some synthetic oil and just lightly oil all the pivots on the derailleur as well as the jockey wheels. Make sure to wipe off any excess oil. You don't want a bunch of dirt sticking to it. Now if you're having some problems getting your derailleur dialed in, this derailleur hanger is this part that hangs off the frame and your derailleur mounts to it. It's really critical that that's aligned and very straight. If it's bent slightly, you're going to have some shifting problems. You might want to take your bike down to a local bike shop. They've got a special tool to align that. If Occasionally you'll get an index shifter that'll stick on you. You can take some WD-40 and squirt it into the shifter, and might need to sit for an hour or two, and it'll help the pawls in the shifter from sticking. You can replace your rear derailleur without breaking your chain. Just simply remove the lower derailleur pulley. Spread the cage across and pull the chain out, and now you can remove the derailleur. When installing pulley bolts, be sure to use a medium Loctite. Grip installation is really easy. If you don't care about the grip, you can just take a razor blade and go ahead and just cut it off. If you want to save your old grips, what I like to do is I'll take a really skinny Allen key and I'll actually slide it down the grip. I'm going to use a little bit of hairspray for this. Kind of work it into the grip, and it should slide right off. To install grips, you'll need some hairspray or some spray adhesive. Go ahead and clean the bar real good. Apply some adhesive inside the grip and slide it on, and it might take a couple hours to dry. They also make a lock-on grip, and it makes it a lot easier to install. Go ahead and mount the clamp on and just simply slide the grip on and clamp it down. Nice thing about these is if you've got a favorite pair of grips you like, you can slide them on one bike and slide them on another, and they're ready to go. Your headset is made up of two bearings, the lower and the upper, and that's what the steering rides on. Occasionally you'll have a headset come loose on you. The best way to check your headset is to place your hand on part of the frame and then place a finger on one of the top cups of the headset, squeeze your front brake, and go ahead and rock the bike back and forth. Now sometimes you'll see where you'll have a worn fork and you're not going to get as accurate of a check by doing so. Go ahead and turn the steering sideways and then check it. That way you're not feeling the play in the fork, you're checking the headset. If you do feel a little play, I'm going to show you how to take that out. To adjust your headset, you're going to need an Allen wrench. Go ahead and loosen the stem clamp bolts on the side. And next we're going to tighten this top bolt here. Now when you turn this, what this is doing is it's compressing the whole headset together. And the idea with this bearing is you want it as loose as you can without any play at all. So what you're going to do is just start by just turning it in about a quarter of a turn to start, maybe even less than that. And if you're not sure exactly where you are in the adjustment, you can always just go ahead and just loosen it so that there is play, and then you can kind of have a better idea of how tight you're going. Once you've got it to where you like it, line the stem up with the tire and tighten down those stem clamp bolts. When you tighten these bolts down, be sure to do each one at a little bit at a time. You don't want to crank one down all the way and then crank the other one, kind of like lug nuts on a car. Ready to go. One final check on the headset. Just pick the back of the bike up and rock the handlebars back and forth just to make sure that they move freely, it's not binding at all. To rewrap your bars on your road bike, you're going to need some bar tape, some electric tape, and a pair of sharp scissors. First thing you're going to want to do is clean off and remove the old bar tape. Make sure the bar is nice and clean. We're going to take some electric tape and we're going to tape the brake housing to the bar. First piece I put just right before the bar starts to bulge, and we'll put another piece right near the brake. Now flip the rubber brake hood back out of the way. Cut off about 2 to 3 inches of bar tape. We're going to later use this to cover the brake clamp. Next thing you want to do is we're going to take the end of the bar tape we're going to start with. I'm going to cut it about a 45-degree angle. This way when I start overlapping it, it's not going to create a huge bulge at the end. Now to do this, you can start at the very edge flush with the bar. I like to overhang the tape a little bit. We'll later tuck it in with the end cap. Just start overlapping, usually about a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch of overlap. You don't want to pull it too hard. You can tear this stuff pretty easily. Main reason we start at the bottom here is so if we started at the top, it would want to just fray down. And once you get to the brake clamp, we're going to take that little strip that we cut, go ahead and place it over the clamp, and just wrap right over it. Go ahead and flip that brake hood back down. We're going to cut it one more time. We'll go ahead and take some electric tape and we're just going to tape it off. Tuck the end in and insert the end cap. You should periodically check your cables and housing. Look for any cracks in the housing. If there's any cracks, I would replace it. Check the cable real good. Look for any frays, or if it's rusted real bad, replace the cable. When you go to replace your housing, there's two kinds of housing. You've got brake housing and you've got shift housing. Brake housing, you notice how it's coiled. It has a little bit of give when you squeeze the brake. Shifter housing has long strands of wire in it and it's compression resistance. This way when you shift your gear, it doesn't move on you. All the ends of the housing should have ferrules. This keeps the housing being pulled through the cable stop. And at the end of all the cables, you should crimp the end so it doesn't fray. There's three types of cables. You've got your road brake cable, you've got your mountain brake cable, and you've got a shift cable. If you want your shifting and braking to improve, you can buy aftermarket Teflon coated cables. This will definitely help. When you go to replace your housing, it's best to save the old housing. This way you can line it up and measure it, and make sure that you're using a special cable cutter. The blade is round so it doesn't crush the housing. Sometimes after you cut your housing, it'll kind of pinch it and want to kind of squeeze the housing in the other direction, try to get it round again. You can take a small sharp object and just try to kind of clean it up a little bit. This way the cable will install easy. Remember to put your ferrule on the end. When replacing a new cable, with the exception of a Teflon cable, I recommend to apply a thin coat of grease on the cable. And when you're done installing the cable, I would take a rag and wipe off the excess grease on all the exposed cable. All the cables start at the controls and then they work their way down to the derailleur or the brake. And when removing a cable, there's a couple different ways to do it. Before changing your cables, be sure to downshift your gears all the way. We're going to loosen the cable. Place a cable on a grip shifter. Again, remember to downshift all the way. There'll be a little slide door on the top of the shifter. You pull it out and you'll be able to push the cable out. Install the cable the same way you took it out. To remove a cable on a SRAM shifter, there's a little trap door located on the other side of the clamp. Remove that and loosen the cable clamp bolt and push the cable out of the shifter. On a Shimano rapid fire shifter, the cable is located underneath on the inside of the shifter here. What you're going to do, some shifters have a little trap door. You're going to go ahead and remove this little cover and the cable will be exposed. You're just going to go ahead and pull the cable out. And you'll install the cable the same way you pulled it out. To replace a gear cable on a road shifter, depress the brake and the cable door will be exposed. It's just on the outside of the shifter. Go ahead and pull the cable out. To remove a mountain bike cable, you're going to line the barrel adjusters up with the cut line on the lever. You're going to go ahead and pull the cable out and it should pop out of the brake lever. And you're going to install it the same way you took it out. To remove a road brake cable, simply depress the brake lever and the cable will be exposed. Go ahead and pull it out, replace it, and install it the same way you took it out. A lot of bikes, the cable runs underneath the bottom bracket shell, and there's a plastic cable guide. Once you have the cable out, you want to clean the guide real good and apply some dry lube. On used cables, I recommend periodically lubricating them with a dry lube. This is a liquid graphite I'm using, works pretty well.